The land stretched for acres, rolling hills, oak trees standing proud, and a quiet lake reflecting the sky like glass. For generations, it had belonged to the Harper family, passed down like a sacred trust from father to son. When Daniel Harper inherited it, he intended to preserve its peace, not to profit from it. The property lines were clear, marked by surveyors decades ago and recorded in county records. Yet boundaries had a way of blurring when greed entered the picture. For years, Daniel's land sat untouched, save for a small farmhouse he occasionally visited. It was his retreat from the noise of the city, a place to breathe. But when he returned one autumn morning after months away, something felt wrong. The once empty fields were busy with movement. Trucks rolled in and out. Cement mixers churned. And at the far edge, freshly built homes stood where his trees once grew. At first, he thought he was mistaken. Perhaps construction was happening next door. But as he drove deeper into his own property, the truth became undeniable. Entire houses, lined in neat rows, had risen on his soil. The familiar oaks were gone, replaced by driveways and manicured lawns. He parked at the entrance of a new subdivision marked by a freshly painted sign. Willow Creek Estates, a proud HOA community. Beneath it, smaller text read, "Managed by Karen Miller, HOA President." Daniel felt a cold weight settle in his chest. He had never given permission for this. No one had approached him. No contracts. No offers. Nothing. Someone had built an entire neighborhood on land that legally belonged to him. He drove further inside, stunned by what he saw. Families were moving in. Children played in cul-de-sacs that didn't exist 6 months ago. There were mailboxes, fences, even a community park under construction. It looked legitimate, too legitimate. And that was what made it so terrifying. That night, Daniel went through his records. He pulled out every deed, every map, every tax document. They all confirmed what he already knew. His land was untouched by sale or transfer. There had been no transaction, no easement, nothing. He still owned it, every square foot. The next morning, he visited the county recorder's office. The clerk's eyes widened as he reviewed the documents. The building permits for Willow Creek Estates had been filed under a different parcel ID, one that had been mysteriously merged with Daniel's in recent months. Someone had tampered with the records, either by mistake or by manipulation. The paperwork had been clean enough to get past most inspections, but it was fraud, plain and simple. Further digging revealed the face behind it all, Karen Miller. A woman known locally for her iron grip over the neighborhoods she managed. She had connections in real estate and zoning boards, often getting her way through persistence and intimidation. According to county records, she was listed as the developer and HOA president for Willow Creek Estates, a position she held with pride, often boasting about turning unused land into thriving communities. Daniel realized this wasn't an accident. It was theft disguised as bureaucracy. He drove back to the property that evening, his anger boiling beneath calm calculation. The new residents waved cheerfully as he passed by, unaware that their dream home stood on someone else's land. He parked by the gate at the main entrance, his gate, still standing after all these years. Beyond it, the paved road now cut across his pasture and into the heart of the new community. He walked the perimeter, marking out boundaries he knew by memory. Every step only confirmed the truth. Nearly half of Willow Creek Estates sat squarely on his property, 36 homes in total. The other half extended into county-owned wetlands, which meant the entire project had been built on shaky legal ground. The sheer audacity of it all was staggering. Someone had not only trespassed, but had built entire lives, entire families, on stolen soil. Daniel knew that confronting Karen directly would be useless. People like her didn't admit wrongdoing, they doubled down. So he began gathering evidence. Drone footage, satellite images, county plats, and his original deed, all compiled neatly in a file. He also hired a surveyor to confirm the encroachment, ensuring everything was legally airtight. The results came back undeniable. The boundary line cut straight through the new development, and every single one of those 36 homes sat where they shouldn't. When Daniel tried to visit the construction office on site, a security guard stopped him, saying the area was private property. The irony nearly made him laugh. He asked for Karen Miller, but the guard told him she wasn't available. That was when Daniel realized how deep this would go. Weeks passed, and construction continued. New families moved in, HOA meetings began, and Willow Creek became the talk of the town. Real estate ads boasted about modern luxury living just outside the city. Meanwhile, Daniel watched in silence, letting them finish their work, letting the problem grow to its full size before cutting it down. When the last driveway was paved and the final homeowner signed their mortgage, Daniel made his move. He contacted his attorney, a man well-versed in property and real estate law. The lawyer's reaction was a mix of disbelief and excitement. Cases like this didn't come around often. The first step was simple but symbolic. Daniel installed a heavy steel gate at the single road that connected Willow Creek Estates to the main highway. It was the same gate that had stood at the original entrance to his ranch, now reinforced and locked with a chain. The next morning, residents woke to find themselves trapped. No cars could enter or leave. Confusion turned to panic, then outrage. Karen Miller was among the first to arrive at the gate, furious, demanding to know who had trespassed onto her property. But Daniel was ready. He had already sent certified letters to every single homeowner in Willow Creek Estates, each one containing a copy of his deed, the surveyor's report, and a formal eviction notice. 36 homes. 36 eviction papers? News spread like wildfire. Local channels picked up the story, calling it a property rights nightmare. Karen, once confident and untouchable, suddenly found herself cornered by reporters asking questions she couldn't answer. Daniel didn't gloat. He simply watched. After all, the law was finally on his side. But as the sun set that evening, he knew the fight was far from over. Karen wasn't the type to back down quietly. She would fight, manipulate, and scheme. She had too much pride and too much to lose. And Daniel, standing at his locked gate, understood one thing clearly. This was only the beginning. The morning after the gate was locked, the entire Willow Creek Estates buzzed with chaos. Residents gathered at the entrance, shouting and arguing, their cars lined up helplessly along the inner road. The newly installed steel gate gleamed in the sunlight, unyielding, with a thick chain looped through its center and a padlock that shimmered like a warning. Beyond it, Daniel's truck sat quietly, parked just out of reach. It didn't take long for HOA President Karen Miller to make her grand appearance. Dressed in her signature blazer and oversized sunglasses, she marched toward the gate like a general inspecting a battlefield. The crowd parted for her, expecting that their leader would somehow solve the crisis with a single phone call or one of her infamous threats. But when she saw the papers nailed to the gate, official eviction notices, each with Daniel Harper's name on them, her confidence faltered for just a second. Karen had built her reputation on control. She ran the HOA with an iron hand, enforcing every rule from mailbox height to lawn color. She was used to intimidation working in her favor. But this was different. This wasn't a resident refusing to trim their hedge or pay dues. This was someone challenging the foundation of everything she had built, literally. Within hours, she was on the phone with lawyers, real estate agents, and the construction company that had helped develop Willow Creek. Each conversation followed the same pattern: confusion, disbelief, then panic. Every document Daniel had filed was legitimate. His ownership was verifiable and recorded. The county, when contacted, admitted that the parcel merger used to build Willow Creek appeared to have been approved under suspicious circumstances. Someone had manipulated property lines using fraudulent filings, and the signature on those documents belonged to Karen Miller. Karen claimed ignorance, insisting it was an administrative oversight. But deep down, she knew. She had pushed through that paperwork months earlier, convinced the land was abandoned and that no one would ever notice. She thought she could take it, develop it, and hide the details in bureaucracy. After all, she'd done it before. Small encroachments, a few feet here or there. But this time, she had gone too far. Meanwhile, Daniel remained silent in public but strategic behind the scenes. He filed a formal lawsuit against the HOA, Karen Miller, and the construction company, seeking full possession and damages. The legal papers moved quickly, and by the end of the week, the county court issued a temporary injunction recognizing his ownership until the case could be resolved. That meant every family currently living in Willow Creek Estates was, in legal terms, trespassing. Karen's response was immediate and ruthless. She called an emergency HOA meeting, inviting every resident to the community park to discuss the situation. She stood before them like a politician under fire, twisting the story to suit her narrative. According to her, Daniel was a greedy landowner trying to exploit technicalities to extort money from hardworking families. She painted herself as the hero, the protector of the community, and encouraged everyone to stand strong and not let him win. For a while, her charisma worked. The residents, frightened and angry, turned their frustration toward Daniel. They sent him letters, emails, even threats. They accused him of trying to steal their homes, ruin their lives, and destroy their neighborhood. But Daniel didn't respond. He knew emotion was Karen's weapon, and silence was his. Instead, he continued to document everything. He installed cameras near the gate, recorded every confrontation, and kept meticulous notes of every interaction. He knew Karen would eventually overplay her hand, and when she did, he'd have the evidence ready. A few days later, she did exactly that. Late one evening, while most residents slept, Karen arrived with a team of hired workers. They carried bolt cutters, flashlights, and determination. Her plan was simple: cut the chain, remove the gate, and reclaim her community's access road. But what she didn't know was that Daniel had anticipated it. He had already informed local authorities and his attorney, setting up a motion for trespassing enforcement. The moment the bolt cutters touched the lock, floodlights ignited across the entrance, and a sheriff's vehicle rolled up from the side road, sirens flashing. Karen froze as the deputy stepped out, his flashlight landing directly on her. Within minutes, the workers scattered, leaving her standing there, speechless. The deputy handed her a printed copy of the injunction, reminding her that the gate, and the land it stood on, belonged to Daniel Harper. Any attempt to tamper with it would be considered criminal trespass. The incident humiliated her. The next day, residents began whispering. Some questioned her leadership. Others started researching the claims themselves and discovered that Daniel wasn't lying. The more they learned, the more their faith in Karen crumbled. She tried to hold the narrative together, but cracks were showing everywhere. Yet Karen wasn't ready to surrender. If she couldn't fight Daniel legally, she would fight him publicly. She contacted local news stations, spinning the story as a land dispute threatening innocent families. She exaggerated, fabricated, and performed. Cameras rolled through Willow Creek Estates, capturing weeping homeowners and angry interviews. Daniel's name spread through social media, painted as a heartless villain, but Daniel remained calm. He understood that public outrage was temporary. Legal ownership was not. The evidence was airtight, and his attorney was already preparing the next move, a full-scale eviction order supported by the court. In the meantime, Daniel visited the edge of the property every few days, watching from a distance. The homes looked peaceful under the evening sun, but beneath the surface, tension simmered. Some residents had stopped paying HOA dues. Others quietly contacted him, asking if there was a way to negotiate staying on the land. Daniel wasn't cruel. He told his attorney to explore fair settlements for families who were truly innocent, those who had bought in good faith. But Karen? She would get none of his mercy. The weeks turned into months as the case progressed. Karen's arrogance began to cost her. County investigators uncovered forged documents linking her to the fraudulent parcel merger. Developers pulled out of projects associated with her. Even the HOA board, once her loyal support system, began to distance themselves, fearing legal consequences. But Karen still had one last move left. She wasn't going to let Daniel win easily. Late one night, under the cover of darkness, she made a desperate call to a local reporter she trusted. She promised him exclusive access to the real story, that Daniel's ownership was based on outdated deeds, that the land boundaries had been misinterpreted for decades, and that she had proof he was lying. Her plan was to discredit him, to turn the tide back in her favor through public manipulation, just as she always had. But what she didn't realize was that Daniel was already several steps ahead. He had discovered something that even Karen hadn't expected, an error she couldn't talk her way out of, because buried deep in the county archives was a document she had missed, an original surveyor's report with her forged signature on it, a report that would soon surface in court, and when it did, Willow Creek Estates would never be the same again. The courtroom was silent except for the echo of shuffling papers and the low hum of air conditioning. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting slanted shadows across the polished wooden benches. On one side sat Daniel Harper, calm, steady, his expression unreadable. On the other sat Karen Miller, rigid, tight-lipped, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles were white. The case of Harper versus Willow Creek HOA et al. Had drawn a crowd. Reporters filled the back row, whispering into recorders, hungry for headlines. Months of tension, lies, and public drama had led to this moment. For Daniel, it was never about revenge. It was about restoring what was rightfully his. For Karen, it was survival, her empire, her reputation, her control over the community she had built on deceit. The judge entered and the bailiff's voice rang out. Everyone rose. The proceedings began. Daniel's attorney presented first, laying out the story from the beginning. With methodical precision, he walked the court through maps, deeds, and survey reports spanning decades. The land, he explained, had belonged to the Harper family since 1911. Every title transfer, every tax payment, every recorded survey confirmed continuous ownership. The recent construction of Willow Creek Estates had occurred without authorization, without sale, and with fraudulent land records. When the original deed was displayed, a weathered document bearing Daniel's grandfather's signature, the courtroom stirred. There was no ambiguity. The land was his. Then came the evidence of fraud. The attorney revealed a series of county filings submitted under Karen Miller's signature, falsely merging Daniel's parcel with an adjacent one. Each document bore dates and signatures that had been cross-verified against official logs. And at the center of it all was the falsified survey, one that Daniel's investigator had found buried deep in the county archives, complete with a digital trail proving it had been uploaded from Karen's HOA office computer. Karen's lawyer tried to object, claiming that she had been misled by contractors and that any errors were unintentional. But Daniel's side had anticipated that argument. They introduced email records, correspondence between Karen and the developers, showing that she had been aware of the ownership dispute months before construction began and had chosen to proceed anyway. The turning point came when a county official testified that Karen had pressured the zoning department to expedite the permit process, bypassing standard land verification procedures. The courtroom murmured with disbelief. Karen sat frozen, her face pale. She had spent years cultivating an image of control and competence. But here, in front of the judge and her community, that image was crumbling piece by piece. Then, for the first time, Daniel's voice broke the silence. Calm, deliberate, and unwavering, he explained how he had discovered the construction, how he had tried to seek clarification, and how he had been dismissed, threatened, and ignored. He described the emotional weight of seeing his family's land stripped bare and replaced with houses built on lies. His words weren't angry, they were resolute, and that made them far more powerful. When he finished, the courtroom remained still. Even the judge took a moment before speaking. Karen's defense team scrambled to recover. They called contractors, real estate agents, and even HOA members to testify that they had believed the land was legitimately acquired. But the more they spoke, the clearer it became that they, too, had been deceived. Karen had assured them the paperwork was handled. She had signed off on everything. By the second day of hearings, the outcome was inevitable. The judge reviewed the evidence, then looked directly at Karen. Her face betrayed no emotion, but her eyes darted nervously. The ruling was swift and absolute. The court affirmed Daniel Harper's full and undisputed ownership of the property known as Willow Creek Estates. All 36 homes built upon it were legally deemed unauthorized structures. The HOA was dissolved, the fraudulent permits nullified, and Karen Miller was found personally liable for damages, legal costs, and restitution. The judgment hit the community like a storm. Within hours, the news spread. Local headlines blared, HOA president loses landmark property fraud case, 36 homes built on stolen land. Residents were in disbelief. Some wept. Others packed their belongings in silence. They had invested their life savings into homes that now stood on land that wasn't theirs. The reality was brutal. Each family had 30 days to vacate while the county and Daniel's team worked on next steps. Karen refused to leave quietly. In interviews, she called the ruling unfair, accusing Daniel of ruining innocent families and profiting from technicalities. But her words carried no weight anymore. Her credibility was gone, and worse, criminal investigations had begun into the fraudulent filings. As the community unraveled, Daniel stayed away from the cameras. He spent his days walking the property, surveying the land he had fought so hard to reclaim. The houses stood still and empty, their windows dark like hollow eyes. He didn't feel triumph, only a somber sense of closure. He knew the residents weren't his enemies. They were victims too in Karen's grand deception. Still, the legal process had to run its course. County officials began organizing the evacuation, posting notices on every front door. Some residents reached out to Daniel asking if they could purchase the lots legally once titles were corrected. He didn't say no. He told his attorney to explore fair options for those willing to stay under proper ownership. Meanwhile, Karen's world collapsed. Her assets were frozen, her reputation shattered, and her closest allies abandoned her. Investigators raided her office, seizing files, hard drives, and financial statements. The truth that surfaced painted an even darker picture. This wasn't her first land manipulation. She had a pattern of exploiting bureaucratic loopholes, quietly annexing small plots into HOA developments without full disclosure. But this time she had gone too big, too bold, and too far. One evening, as Daniel stood by the lake that bordered the property, he saw the reflection of the half-finished community in the water. What was meant to be a monument to greed had become a ghost town of consequence. The air was still, almost mournful. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to exhale. The fight had drained him, but it had also revealed something important: how easily people like Karen could manipulate the system and how essential it was to stand firm against them. But the story wasn't quite over. A week later, Daniel's attorney received notice of an appeal. Karen Miller wasn't done. Despite everything, the evidence, the verdict, the public humiliation, she was trying to reverse the ruling. She claimed she had new documents that would change everything. Most dismissed it as desperation, but Daniel wasn't naive. Karen had proven that she would stop at nothing to regain control, even if it meant sinking deeper into deceit. The next battle wouldn't be in the courtroom. It would be outside it. A war of influence, manipulation, and retaliation. And Daniel knew that if he didn't stay vigilant, she might find another way to strike, because for someone like Karen Miller, losing wasn't an ending. It was an invitation to fight dirtier, and Daniel Harper was about to learn just how far she was willing to go. The courtroom had spoken, but Karen Miller's defeat didn't end the war. It simply changed its battlefield. In the weeks following the ruling, the once bustling Willow Creek estates grew eerily quiet. Half the residents had already left, their moving trucks rumbling down the now deserted streets. The lawns grew unkempt, mailboxes leaned, and for-sale signs appeared like gravestones marking the death of a dream. Daniel Harper had hoped that peace would finally return. He had reclaimed his land, the court had vindicated him, and the county had begun unraveling the fraud Karen had orchestrated. But Karen was not the type to accept silence. Her pride had been wounded, and pride was the one thing she valued more than money. She disappeared from the public eye after the verdict. For a while, no one saw her. Her office was closed, her car gone, her phone disconnected. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said she fled the state. Others claimed she was negotiating a deal with prosecutors. Daniel didn't care which was true. He only wanted to move forward. But then, strange things began happening. It started small. A break-in at one of the unoccupied homes, tools missing, locks broken. Then one morning, Daniel found tire tracks leading past the locked gate. The chain had been cut cleanly through and the padlock was gone. Someone had forced their way back onto the property. He resecured it immediately, replacing the chain with a heavier one and installing additional surveillance cameras. He didn't have to guess who was behind it. Karen's fingerprints weren't on the steel, but her arrogance was all over the act. It wasn't about trespassing. It was about control. A message that said, "You may have won in court, but this land will never truly be yours." That evening, Daniel reviewed the footage from his cameras. Through the grainy night vision, he saw her, Karen, in a hooded jacket, standing by the gate, flashlight in hand. She lingered there for several minutes, staring through the bars as if confronting an invisible enemy. Then she turned and walked back toward the community road, vanishing into the darkness. It was clear she wasn't finished. Over the following weeks, her campaign grew bolder. Anonymous complaints began flooding the county office, claims that Daniel was violating environmental regulations, that he was illegally detaining residents, that his fences were on public land. Each accusation was baseless, but they forced inspections, paperwork, and delays. It was harassment by bureaucracy, a tactic Karen knew well. Daniel's attorney advised him to ignore her and document everything. "She's baiting you," the lawyer warned. "If you retaliate, she'll twist it." So Daniel did what he always did. He stayed calm, collected, and deliberate. But Karen wasn't working alone anymore. She had convinced a handful of disgruntled homeowners, those who refused to accept eviction, that Daniel was their true enemy. They called themselves the Willow Creek Loyalists. They trespassed onto the property at night, tearing down his private land signs and dumping trash by the gate. They even vandalized one of his survey markers, replacing it with a fake boundary post marked Community Line. For Daniel, it was infuriating. But it also revealed something deeper. Karen was desperate to maintain relevance. She had lost everything, yet she couldn't let go of the illusion that she still held power. One morning, Daniel arrived at the property to find smoke rising near the park area. Someone had set fire to one of the abandoned HOA storage sheds. The flames had been small and extinguished quickly, but the message was clear: escalation. The sheriff's department opened an investigation, and though no arrests were made, everyone knew who was responsible. Still, Karen was careful, never directly involved, always operating through whispers and influence. She filed her appeal, claiming newly discovered evidence, but the court dismissed it within weeks. The judge cited her actions as an abuse of the legal process. That should have ended it. But instead, it pushed her past the breaking point. In her mind, she wasn't a criminal, she was a victim. The world had conspired against her, and Daniel had destroyed everything she had built. That twisted sense of injustice drove her toward vengeance. Her next move wasn't through courts or protests, it was through manipulation. She began leaking false stories to local blogs, painting Daniel as a ruthless developer who had forced out innocent families to sell the land for millions. Online, the narrative shifted. Social media turned ugly. Photos of the locked gate circulated with captions like, "Local man evicts families for profit." For the first time, Daniel's calm resolve began to strain. Reporters showed up at his farmhouse. Strangers trespassed to take pictures. His voicemail filled with hateful messages from people who knew nothing about the truth. And then, one evening, a letter appeared in his mailbox. No address, no name, just one sentence written in red ink. "You don't own what you stole." He handed it to the sheriff the next morning. It couldn't be traced. That same week, Karen resurfaced publicly. A viral video appeared online, showing her standing outside the locked gate, tears streaming down her face, claiming that dozens of families had been left homeless because of Daniel Harper's greed. The performance was flawless. She played the victim perfectly, and sympathy poured in. But this time, Daniel was ready. He released his own evidence through official channels: county deeds, court rulings, survey footage, and even drone videos showing her trespassing. Within days, the tide turned again. Public opinion shifted back in his favor. Karen's video was revealed to be a manipulation, and her last shred of credibility evaporated. Still, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't done. He was right. Late one stormy night, his motion sensors triggered an alert. He checked the feed and froze. Headlights moved slowly along the dirt road leading to the gate. The car stopped, and a figure stepped out. Umbrella in one hand, crowbar in the other. It was her. He called the sheriff immediately, but before help arrived, the cameras caught her in a fit of rage. She slammed the crowbar against the padlock again and again, screaming into the wind, her voice drowned by thunder. When the lights of approaching vehicles appeared in the distance, she fled, disappearing into the rain. The deputies found the crowbar on the ground, bent and slick with mud. That night marked the end of Karen Miller's delusions. The sheriff's department filed criminal charges: trespassing, destruction of property, harassment, and obstruction of justice. This time there would be no appeal, no manipulation, no excuses. When she was finally arrested, she didn't resist. The photos from that night spread across the internet. The once proud HOA president, now disheveled and broken, sitting in the back of a police car, her umbrella lying in the mud beside her. For Daniel, watching the footage later brought no satisfaction, just quiet relief. The storm, at last, was ending. But even then, as rain washed over the empty streets of Willow Creek Estates, Daniel couldn't help but wonder how much damage one person's pride could cause. The land would heal, the houses could be rebuilt or removed, but the stain of deceit would linger for years. Still, as he stood at his gate once more, dawn breaking through the mist, Daniel made a silent vow. Never again would anyone take what his family had built. The land was his, not because of a court ruling, but because he had protected it with everything he had. He turned to walk back toward his farmhouse, unaware that the final chapter of the Willow Creek saga was still waiting to unfold, one that would test not just his patience, but his conscience. The storm had passed, both in the sky and in Daniel Harper's life. Months had rolled by since the night Karen Miller was taken away in handcuffs, her empire of lies collapsing around her. Willow Creek Estates, once a symbol of ambition and deceit, now stood silent and hollow. The manicured lawns had grown wild, weeds pushing through cracks in the pavement. The once vibrant houses, stripped of families and hope, looked more like monuments to greed than homes. Daniel visited the land often, walking the roads that had been carved through his fields. The air felt different now, peaceful, but heavy with memory. Every corner of the development carried a story. The family that had believed they were buying their dream home, the workers who had built it unaware of the fraud, and the woman who had orchestrated it all. Karen's trial had concluded quietly, away from the cameras that once followed her every move. She had pled guilty to multiple charges: property fraud, falsification of records, trespassing, and harassment. Her sentence was measured not only in years, but in the irreversible destruction of her reputation. She was barred from any involvement in real estate or HOA management for life. When Daniel received notice of her sentencing, he didn't celebrate. He simply folded the letter and placed it in a drawer alongside the deed to his land. Justice, he thought, wasn't about punishment. It was about restoration. But restoration was no simple task. The land bore scars deeper than the surface could show. The community, too, was fractured. Some of the displaced homeowners had rebuilt their lives elsewhere, but a few reached out, expressing a desire to stay, to start over the right way this time. Daniel hesitated at first. The legal complexities were vast, and trust had been shattered. But as he walked those empty streets, he realized that holding on to anger would serve no one. He decided to rebuild, not the same way Karen had, but with integrity. He began by meeting with county officials and urban planners, proposing a new vision for the land. The goal wasn't luxury or profit, it was community. He wanted to create a small, honest neighborhood that honored the land's history while offering affordable homes for working families. The county supported the plan, grateful for his cooperation after months of chaos. One by one, the remnants of Willow Creek were dismantled. Illegal structures were removed, unsafe foundations torn out, and the soil restored where possible. Some homes, those legally reparable, were saved and repurposed. Daniel oversaw every step, ensuring that no corner was cut, no line crossed. As construction crews worked, the media began to revisit the story. This time, they portrayed Daniel differently, not as a villain or recluse, but as a man who had fought a corrupt system and reclaimed his family's legacy with dignity. Headlines read, "From victim to visionary, landowner rebuilds the right way." Still, the ghosts of Willow Creek lingered. Daniel would sometimes find remnants left behind, an old HOA sign, a forgotten toy, a crumpled flyer from one of Karen's meetings. Each piece reminded him of how fragile trust could be, and how easily it could be manipulated by someone driven by ego. He thought often about Karen. There were moments, late at night, when he wondered what had driven her to such extremes. Was it greed or something deeper? The need for power? Recognition? Or simply the inability to admit she was wrong? He would never know. She had built her downfall brick by brick, just as surely as she had built those stolen homes. When the new neighborhood was finally ready, Daniel stood at the same gate where it all began. The steel had been removed, replaced with a simple wooden arch bearing a new name, Harper's Grove. Beneath it, a modest sign read, "Private property, built with integrity." Families began to move in, not under false promises or hidden agendas, but through open, honest agreements. Daniel personally handed over the first set of keys to a young couple, a gesture that marked a new beginning for both them and the land itself. Life slowly returned. Children played in the park again, laughter echoing where silence once reigned. The lake, once neglected, shimmered with reflections of a community reborn. Daniel's farmhouse became the heart of it all, a gathering place for barbecues, meetings, and memories. Yet even amid peace, he remained vigilant. He kept the records secure, every deed and document carefully preserved. He knew how easily the system could be bent, and he refused to let history repeat itself. Years later, when reporters revisited the story for a documentary, Daniel spoke plainly. He didn't glorify what had happened, nor did he dwell on Karen's downfall. Instead, he spoke of lessons, about property, about power, about how people can twist good intentions into exploitation. He ended the interview with a quiet reflection. People think land is just dirt and trees, but it holds everything we are. It remembers who takes care of it and who tries to steal it. You can build on it, pave it, even lie about it, but the truth always comes back to the surface. As time went on, Harper's Grove flourished. The community thrived, grounded in honesty and respect. Daniel became something of a local legend, not for vengeance, but for perseverance. The man who locked the gate and served eviction papers had become a symbol of accountability, and though he never saw Karen again, sometimes when the wind rustled through the oaks by the lake, Daniel imagined it carried whispers of her downfall, a cautionary echo reminding him how pride can destroy even the most carefully built empires. One autumn evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold, Daniel stood once more at the edge of his land. The fields stretched wide, the houses gleamed softly in the distance, and peace, real peace, finally settled over the ground. It had taken years, countless battles, and one woman's ruin to restore what should never have been taken. But now at last, the land was whole again. Daniel closed the gate behind him, the wood creaking gently, not in defiance but in finality. The war was over, and in that quiet moment, beneath the fading light, the story of Willow Creek ended, not with anger or victory, but with truth, renewal, and the calm certainty that justice, though slow, always finds its way home.